Disclaimer: the following program is designed to offend, provoke, and challenge your religious sensibilities. It contains content that will likely offend anyone who holds religion sacred. This is for those with thick skin or a taste for the harsh truth. If you're easily offended or cherish your religious views, please turn off now. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You have been warned. Before we get into today's chapter, I need to say a few things, especially for those of you starting to feel bored, burnt out, or just tired of watching this book fall apart one chapter at a time. Yes, I know. The Bible is repetitive. The stories blur together. The theology contradicts itself. And for those who don't believe, this might start to feel like beating a dead horse. I mean, I usually have to take the edge off before even opening this thing. Not because I'm trying to be cool. I'm too old for that. It's because trying to read this mess with a clear head is like volunteering for punishment. By the time I'm making the video, I've already watched the Bible collapse under its own contradictions so many times it feels like a stress test designed by a sadist. But this isn't just for the already deconverted. This is for the people who still read the Bible and think that doesn't make sense, but keep going anyway because they think they're the problem. You aren't the problem, the book is. This project I've taken on, it's been almost 4 months now. It's a lot, but it's a systematic takedown, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Not cherry-picked verses, not vague allusions, full dissection. I'm not here to entertain your personal interpretation or tiptoe around your preferences. I don't care what meaning you squeezed out of a metaphor. That's your business. I'm here to show what the text actually says, what logic says it says, and how often it contradicts itself, rewrites itself, or collapses just under someone like me, a literal nobody, using basic scrutiny. This is the main event, and I'm not stopping because your attention span didn't survive Matthew. You're welcome to disagree with me. You're even welcome to be offended. But don't confuse that with having a valid rebuttal. I bring reason, context, sources, and the actual text. If you're bringing feelings and folklore, well, good luck with that. Apologists love to say, you just misunderstood. Really? I've misunderstood every single chapter, misread every contradiction, so many chapters, and somehow the problem is still me? Say that again when this whole thing's on the table and the pattern is undeniable. I'm not confused. I'm making your doctrine collapse in real time. And just so there's no misunderstanding, no, I'm not claiming to have the ultimate interpretation of every verse in this book. I'm not pretending to have secret insights or any kind of prophetic authority or way to decode the Bible better than you. What I am doing is reading the Bible the way we'd read anything else, logically, consistently, and without bias. And when I say without bias, I mean with as little bias as a human being can do. I would love to believe there's a God. Maybe there is one, but from what I can see, it's not the God of this book, because what's written here is petty, self-contradictory, erratic, and incoherent. If this is supposed to be the gold standard of revelation, then the bar wasn't just low, it was never even there. I'm not here to give you new beliefs. I'm here to help people finally admit the old ones don't hold up. This isn't dogma, this is demolition. And if your God's message requires endless reinterpretation, constant clarification, and a trained theologian to make it coherent, maybe it's not truth. Maybe it's exactly what I think it is, garbage. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And now let's finish up Matthew 13. Jesus offers another one-sentence parable with no context and no follow-up. A man finds a treasure in a field he doesn't own, buries it again, sells everything he has, and buys the land. That's it. No explanation, just a vague story with built-in moral confusion. And somehow, this is what the kingdom of heaven is supposed to be like. At first glance, it might sound like a tale about sacrifice or devotion. And you can read it however you choose, but read it again. The man finds something valuable buried in someone else's property. He doesn't tell the owner. He doesn't share it. He hides it and buys the land before anyone else realizes what they had. If this is a metaphor for salvation, then Jesus is openly praising dishonesty. And in case you were wondering, under first century Jewish practice, any discovered treasure belonged to the landowner, not the finder. So this guy's clever maneuver actually collapses under basic property law. This isn't generosity. It's a setup. He benefits from someone else's ignorance, and Jesus holds that up as an ideal. There's no way to dress that up as righteous behavior. It's not clever. It's not wise. It's a deliberate lie of omission to get what you want. And that's what the kingdom is like. Then there's the constant Christian fallback. The man represents the believer. Sure. Let's follow that logic. If we're supposed to see ourselves in this guy, then salvation isn't given, it's something you buy. You sell everything you have to obtain it. So much for grace, so much for the gift of God. According to this parable, heaven has a price tag, and if you can't afford it, well, that's your problem. And some apologists cartwheel around trying to flip this, saying the man is actually Jesus buying the world. So now you have a divine real estate mogul rather than believer. Either way, it turns into a clown show. The contradictions are everywhere. Just a few chapters earlier in Matthew 10:8, Jesus says, "Freely you have received, freely give." In Romans 6:23, Paul calls eternal life a gift. But here in Matthew 13, Jesus says you can and should buy your way in. No donations, no charity, no grace, just liquidation. And if someone tries to patch that up by claiming the man is actually Jesus and we're the treasure, then the situation gets worse. Now Jesus is the one hiding what doesn't belong to him and purchasing it behind someone else's back. That's not a redeemer, that's a con man. The parable also directly contradicts Matthew 5:16, where believers are told to let your light shine before others. In this story, the kingdom is hidden, not shared, not offered, just buried and quietly transferred to the one who knew where to look. It's the same pattern we've seen all chapter long. Some are meant to understand, and the rest are out of luck. I mean, seriously, compare this to Luke 12, verse 33 that says, "Sell your possessions and give to the poor." But instead, in this parable, the man sells everything and keeps the profit for himself. No poor, no charity, just a private purchase of a hidden reward. And in Acts 8, Simon the sorcerer tries to buy the gift of God and gets condemned. May your money perish with you. So in one gospel, buying spiritual power is heresy. In another, it's the goal. And again, notice how the treasure is never offered. The man doesn't grow into the kingdom. He doesn't change. He doesn't repent. He just finds something other people missed, buries it again, and pays to secure it. That's the example. That's the model. This is not about redemption. It's about leverage. Matthew 13:44 doesn't teach sacrifice. It doesn't teach morality. It teaches how to spot an advantage and lock it down before anyone else notices. If that's what Jesus meant, then this isn't a parable about salvation. It's a warning about what happens when religion becomes a marketplace. And if this is what heaven is like, hidden, costly, and quietly taken, maybe the real treasure is realizing how rigged the system was from the start. Here comes another one-liner from Jesus. No setup, no explanation, no follow-up. This time, the kingdom of heaven is compared to a merchant who discovers a single priceless pearl, then walks away, sells everything he owns, and buys it. If that sounds familiar, it should. Matthew really wants to make sure you understand what he's saying here. It's a retread of the treasure parable, only with polished jewelry instead of buried loot. Same point, different packaging. The kingdom is rare, valuable, and costs everything. But this version includes one line that almost no one notices, because most modern translations soften it or gloss right past it. Only in the Young's literal translation do you really feel the weight of it, having gone away. Not emphasized in the NIV, downplayed in the ESV, barely there in the KJV, but in the Greek, it's there. Apelthon. He left. He walked away from the discovery. He didn't act immediately. He created distance, sold everything somewhere else, and then returned to make the purchase. Why does that matter? Because it means this wasn't an impulsive act of wonder or worship. It was premeditated. Quiet. The merchant doesn't celebrate. He doesn't spread the word. He doesn't invite anyone else to witness the value. He finds it, disappears, liquidates his assets in private, and returns with the money. And that, according to Jesus, is what the kingdom of heaven is like. So let's look at the theology this presents. If the merchant is supposed to represent a believer, then salvation isn't something freely given, it's something you buy after walking away and counting the cost. It's not grace, it's a strategic exchange. And that destroys the entire idea of a gospel. You're not redeemed, you're just resourceful. Now, some try to dodge that by flipping the metaphor. They say the merchant is Jesus and the pearl is humanity, but that's worse. Because now Jesus is the one isolating, retreating, and buying people like commodities. Apparently, redemption is a high-stakes transaction and humanity is a product. If salvation was supposed to be a gift, this is a strange way to show it. Then there's the pearl itself. Not a net full of fish, just one item, one lucky find. The implication is simple: the kingdom isn't available to all. It's a one-time opportunity spotted by someone savvy enough to recognize it before anyone else. And what does the merchant do? He locks it down. He doesn't distribute it, he doesn't offer it to others, he keeps it. And again, what's missing here? There's no grace, no mercy, no transformation. The man doesn't change. He just acquires. He finds something that others missed, and he executes a plan to make it his. The moral? If you're smart, fast, and willing to lose everything, you might get in. Everyone else? Try again next stage. There are other contradictions too, but we don't need to rehash the same ones from the treasure parable. What matters here is that Jesus presents the kingdom as something that isn't shared, isn't offered, and isn't explained. It's reserved for whoever gets there first and is willing to pay. Matthew 13 verse 11 promises he'll privately explain every mystery, but metaphors like the treasure, pearl, and net get zero follow-up. That sudden mystery solved, then mystery explained doesn't happen on every metaphor. So another lie by Jesus. Divinely inspired, though? You'd think a divinely inspired book would make sure all the explanations are in there, huh? Weird. So let's not pretend this is a message of hope. There's no welcome here. There's no invitation, just a closed-door deal with no refunds and no second chances. The kingdom is portrayed like a luxury asset with a silent buyer and no press release. And that's supposed to be good news? If this is how heaven works, hidden, gated, and bought in silence, then maybe the real message of the parable isn't about salvation at all. Maybe it's about how religion rewards the ones who play the system while pretending it was grace all along. Jesus wraps up his parable spree with a fishing metaphor. The kingdom is like a net, dragged through the sea, scooping up everything in its path. Once it's full, it gets hauled to shore, sorted, and the bad catch is thrown out and burned. This isn't about any kind of transformation or growth. This is classification and disposal. The net doesn't judge, it gathers. But once it's full, the separation begins. The good fish are kept. The bad are discarded, and not just discarded, they're incinerated. And let's pause here for a second, because understand what's going on here. It's not Satan doing the burning. It's not demons with pitchforks. It's the angels. The same heavenly squad everyone thinks is floating around with harps and wings and good feelings. They're the ones dragging people out and throwing them into the fire. Not later, not after the good are taken. First. Verse 49 says, "The messengers shall come forth and separate the evil out of the midst of the righteous." And then what? Verse 50, straight into the flames. No appeal, no sermon, just incineration, courtesy of God's elite fire squad. This is heaven's payroll doing the executions. Think really hard about that. This is also the second time in the same chapter that Jesus says judgment starts with the wicked getting removed, not the righteous being saved. It mirrors Matthew 13:30 in the parable of the weeds. "Gather ye first the darnel." No secret escape rapture, no early rescue. The faithful stay behind, the wicked get yanked out and destroyed. So for anyone still clinging to the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture where believers get vacuumed into the sky to avoid all the drama, this text doesn't support that. It flatly contradicts it. The bad go first. And they don't go quietly. Then there's the sorting itself. There's no explanation of what qualifies a fish as good or bad. No checklist, no faith test, no repentance clause. You're just caught, judged, and tossed based on a standard you're never told. And once you're labeled bad, there's no coaching, no second chance, no restoration, just fire. Oh, and before a certain apologist crawls into the comment section with the usual garbage of, actually, this was just about the fall of Jerusalem routine. No, it's not. Jesus doesn't say Rome will invade. He says angels will show up, sort the wicked out first, and toss them into a furnace of fire where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's not siege warfare. That's divine execution. And the timeline? At the end of the age. Not in 40 years. Not when Titus gets moody. The parable isn't about a political collapse. It's about a purge with no second round and no appeals. Trying to downgrade this to a local Roman eviction isn't honest exegesis. It's rewriting the story to make Jesus look less insane. And let's talk about that furnace. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's Matthew's go-to punishment aesthetic. This isn't correction, this isn't purification, this is pain. Unrelenting, conscious destruction with zero chance to change your fate. So let's summarize what this parable teaches. First, everyone gets caught, half get discarded. The bad are removed first. No one explains why, and there's no second round. The angels aren't rescuing, they're purging. This isn't salvation. This is processing, a sorting with one outcome for the unapproved: fire. Jesus concludes his parable spree with a pop quiz. Did you understand all these? The disciples confidently respond, yes, sir, though given their track record, this seems more like hopeful optimism than genuine comprehension. Then comes the final analogy. A scribe trained for the kingdom is like a householder who brings out treasures both new and old. At first glance, it suggests that a well-instructed teacher draws from both long-standing traditions and fresh insights, but dig a little deeper and the metaphor becomes more complex. This originally applied to legal scribes blending Torah with new revelation, not an exclusive in-crowd joke. Matthew co-opts it as a brag about clerical control, turning scribes into religious special people rather than humble students. The term scribe traditionally refers to experts in Jewish law, individuals deeply versed in the old teachings. By likening them to householders showcasing both new and old treasures, Jesus seems to be advocating for a blend of established doctrines and his own novel teachings. It's as if he's saying, keep the old scrolls, but don't forget to add my latest sermons to your repertoire. However, this raises questions and problems of its own. If the old teachings were sufficient, why introduce new ones? And if the new teachings are paramount, why cling to the old? The metaphor suggests a harmonious coexistence, but the reality is more complex. The introduction of new doctrines often challenges and reshapes the old, leading to reinterpretations and, at times, contradiction. Moreover, the imagery of a householder bringing out treasures implies control and curation. The scribe decides what to present and when. This doesn't just make religious teachers conveyors of divine truth, it turns them into gatekeepers, deciding which teachings, old or new, actually make the cut. You still see it today when they exclude entire books from the Bible, labeling them forgeries or apocryphal, as if that verdict wasn't handed down by the same people who had everything to lose from including them. In essence, this concluding parable underscores the evolving nature of religious instruction. It acknowledges the value of tradition while emphasizing the importance of new revelations. Yet it also highlights the influential role of religious leaders in shaping and presenting these teachings, reminding us that the transmission of spiritual knowledge is as much about interpretation as it is about content. If this is the model for the kingdom of heaven, then perhaps it's less about divine revelation and more about who controls the narrative. What happens when Jesus goes back to his hometown? It's certainly not a hero's welcome. The crowd isn't buying the Jesus hype. They knew him before the miracles, and now they're not impressed. And instead of proving them wrong, Jesus walks away with barely any miracles, no answers, and a quote about prophets getting disrespected. The townspeople are stunned, but not in awe. They are confused and offended. Isn't this the carpenter's kid? We know his mom, we know his brothers, his sisters still live here. Why is he acting like some kind of prophet? And Jesus fires back with a well-worn phrase, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and in his own house. But he's not declaring himself a prophet. He's quoting a well-known proverb of the time, something his audience would have already heard. He's not making a theological claim. He's just comparing himself to the long list of rejected messengers in Israel's past. Jeremiah, Elijah, etc. Same pattern. Familiarity breeds rejection. But here's the whole problem with this. Jesus doesn't correct them. He doesn't teach. He doesn't explain. He just leads. And verse 58 drives this point home. It says, he did not there many mighty works because of their unbelief. Not none, just not many. That's the narrative spin Matthew chooses. He blames the lack of miracles on their disbelief, not Jesus' power. But let's pull back and check the other Gospels. John 2:23 through 25 already explained why he wasn't showing off. It says Jesus withheld signs because he knew all men, not just because the townspeople lacked faith. Matthew's "they disbelieved, so I didn't heal" excuse is a recycled trope, not fresh history. Mark 6, verse 5 says he was not able to do any mighty work there, except that on a few infirm people, having put hands, he healed. So he did perform some miracles. Mark just wants us to know it wasn't impressive. Not zero, but limited. Luke 4 takes a different approach entirely. Jesus shows up, reads from Isaiah, tells them a prophet gets no honor, and the town tries to kill him. There are no miracles at all, not even an attempt. 3 versions, 3 narratives. One of them says he healed a few people. One of them acts like he chose not to. One of them skips the miracles and escalates to an angry mob. So which one do you want to believe? If Mark came first, and most scholars agree he did, then that version is the base model. A few healings, no big miracles. Matthew dials it back further and just says not many. Luke goes full dramatization and cuts the miracles entirely. That's not a consistent theology. And another thing, Jesus does perform miracles for unbelievers elsewhere. He heals a paralyzed man in front of skeptical Pharisees in Mark 2. He raises Lazarus from the dead in front of a mourning crowd in John 11. He heals a Roman centurion's servant on hearsay alone, Matthew 8. He drives out demons in foreign territories. He calms storms for confused disciples. So what's different here? Nazareth is different because it's too familiar. They knew him before the robes and the sermons, and the narrative can't allow their rejection to succeed. So instead of Jesus proving them wrong, he walks away. Not because he lacked power, but because the story isn't about convincing doubters, it's about reinforcing separation. If you weren't already in, you don't get proof. It seems like Matthew has a very specific narrative for this entire chapter, and this is where the text becomes even more manipulative. Jesus doesn't mourn their unbelief. He doesn't correct them. He doesn't fight for his hometown. He abandons it. Even though they ask, where did this man get these things? He never answers. He lets their confusion stand. The Son of God walks away from his own people like a disgruntled street preacher. So what does this say about the kingdom? It confirms the elitist model Matthew's been preaching since verse 1. Salvation is hidden, access is restricted. If you don't already recognize the treasure, the pearl, or the sower, you're out. Even if you're his neighbor, even if you raised him, even if you want to believe. The miracles weren't limited by lack of faith, they were limited by design. Jesus leaves them behind not because they weren't worthy, but because the story needed another rejection to fulfill the script. If you're confused, good. That's what the parables were for. If you're skeptical, too bad. He's already gone. And if you grew up with Jesus and still didn't catch on, then, well, I guess even God incarnate has no patience for your hesitation. And if that's what the kingdom of heaven looks like, gate-kept, rigid, and cold to those who knew you best, then the final miracle isn't healing. It's how fast the story ghosted the very people who raised him. Not much of a punchline this time. Honestly, some chapters just aren't funny, and they shouldn't be. This one was rough. The deeper you go into it, the harder it hits. And I know some of you watching are going to feel that hit hard. I'm not without empathy. I get how deeply people believe this stuff. I know what it costs to even start questioning it. So yeah, it does weigh on me to show how these stories fall apart, not because I think I'm wrong, but because I know how devastating it can be when the realization lands. Anyway, that's it for now. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next one.